It's Primus Tracks with Josh and Frankie.
What a couple of dumb shits. Thanks for joining us, Teddy. Really appreciate you being here today. My goodness, I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, how did you get roped into the Wonka tour in the first place? How'd this come about?
Yeah, man. Well, first off, it's awesome to be here and talking with you guys. So that it's funny. We're talking like 2014.
Yeah.
In my mind, it's even longer ago. But I was living out in the Bay. The job came about pretty unexpectedly because I was working with other bands, kind of also in the, like the pop sort of touring circuit, big bus tours and stuff. But generally kind of more in that kind of indie rock scene, a little softer tone. I actually was playing with a band. The connection I'm now remembering came through a band called Iron and Wine that I was working with.
Oh, sure, yeah.
On a tour with this, basically it was like a 13-piece horn, strings, backup singers, and the clarinet player, whose name is Stuart Bogey, who is a phenomenal musician. He also worked with Arcade Fire, and I believe that at some point along the way, Primus and Arcade Fire did something. I don't know if it was just some festival stuff or if they did more of an extensive tour. But somehow they came into contact, and this is as it works with people like me who are hired guns and playing in different groups. I should just say I'm a cellist.
Yeah.
So it's like by the time a band that didn't originally have cello is in a position to bring a cellist on the road, like they've either been around for decades or they're making good money. It's like it's more of a business at that point, it seems. And there's a lot of, management involved. But anyways, so I was a member of Arcade Fire through Iron and Wine, asked about a cellist in the Bay Area, and he knew that I did a lot of kind of more avant-garde sort of improvised music, and so put me in touch with Brad Sands, who is the manager. And it kind of just went like that. And Brad reached out to see if I was available and interested. It also coincided, I guess, with their other cellist, this dude, Sam Bass, who you've probably encountered. Sam, I guess, was just no longer available or interested in, I think, doing another full-on tour cycle. And I'd known Sam from totally other, cello things, just sort of in the Bay. He ran a really cool salon happening. Yeah. And so it was just that. It was like, would you possibly be interested? Maybe you could get together with Les to play, just kind of to see if you vibe musically. And we talked a bit. And yeah, it seemed like it was going to be a good fit. So it sort of just rolled. And then we got together for rehearsals in San Rafael.
Very good.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cause and effect in there.
Totally.
Or a confluence of events one way or the other. So, but it reinforces to me that some of those circles are smaller than we think. Cause Sam, it was a kind of a grapevine thing to get from Iron and Wine to Arcade Fire to Primus, which,
totally.
In the world of rock and pop, you would put them pretty far apart, in
right.
your little universe. And it sounds like that's not necessarily your scene, because checking out your website, teddyrp.com, by the way, that's just a fun look. You mentioned the term avant-garde, and that's what the samples that I'm hearing and seeing on there, that's more of your bag, or not your bag, but more of your approach and what you've been doing for years. Walking into the room to work with somebody like Iron and Wine, or Primus for that matter, what are the major differences there, especially when you walk in the room and you're trying to vibe with this bass player who does insane things, I guess?
Yeah, totally, man. Well, it's interesting. You would maybe think it, but, I was classically trained, which was great. It gave me an awesome foundation just technically as a player. But because I got really interested in contemporary music and like free jazz and just much more kind of out of the box playing, it made me that much more just kind of marketable almost for pop and rock bands, because there's a lot of classical musicians who just who literally won't play anything that's not on the page in front of them. And it has to do with the training for sure. Unfortunately, it's this incredibly kind of militant, very conservative, safe sort of approach to music making.
It can, those purists or those guys yeah.
Right. And I think so then to ask, someone from the conservatory to improvise, you get sort of met with the blank stare. And so the fact is, like, having those experiences of playing like really extremely out kind of avant-garde music actually makes me feel super comfortable just going into a room where you don't exactly know what to expect. And you're going to be asked to do more kind of sound painting, sort of textural things, and, sort of make up your own parts. That's the other thing you run into a lot. You go into the studio and bands are like, okay, like now play a super sick string part like off the top of your head. Which is incredibly hard to do. Do
you think they're asking you that because they go, well, this guy's classically trained, so he can just whip it out whenever he wants?
Kind of, yeah. They just think like, well, a cellist should be able to just play like cello part, or like a violinist should be able to just come up with violin parts, not realizing that it's like, there's much more complexity. But so it's funny to think, even though the sounds of a band like Iron and Wine and Primus are so different, my experience in both of those sessions is actually kind of similar, because you're kind of trying to be very present and sort of engage, with what's going on while it's going on. Although I will say though that, so like the Wonka tour I wasn't involved in making the record.
Right.
Sam Bass is the cellist on the record, and Sam had this long-standing relationship with Les, and Sam's an incredible cellist. And I think Sam then also wrote all the cello parts. I had nothing to do with that.
Right.
But so part of the job description was learn note by note. And really that's kind of particular to Les, to have it with that sort of specificity. Learn the parts as they exist on the record, because that's what we're going to be performing. Yeah. There's actually not necessarily a whole lot of room for improvisation. So leading up to the first rehearsal, I was just basically poring over the recording and learning it. There's a couple like breaks where I would have liberties to just like do my own noisy thing, which was fun. And as the tour progressed, those breaks got larger and larger, and they turned into like full blown kind of free sections, which was super fun. I mean, really, really fun, just cause like they were, that was my bag, as you put it. It was like, we were just having these free jam sessions on stage. But to start, it was like, it was exactly as the record existed, which in some ways was cool. It was a relief. It was just like, I knew what the expectation was and I could do that,
So I'm pretty curious about the record, Teddy. I was just actually going to ask you about that. So you had to learn it note by note, with real precision. What was your first impression of the album when you heard it? And was there any particular song that stuck out for you that you were really looking forward to playing, or that maybe you were even nervous to play because of any level of difficulty?
No, that's a great question. Well, so right, it's the Wonka music. I have this, for me, it wasn't like I'd obsessed over Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but just through like literally like, socialization in the United States, I was exposed. I saw it multiple times. It was like a thing, I mean, there was almost like a culture around that, which, I think then to think about whatever notion Les decided to act on when he was gonna, reimagine it as like some psychedelic redux, it's pretty cool, just culturally or whatever. And so just kind of, from the outset, that was intriguing to me, that we were going to be doing this sort of dreamscape of some, of this like opus from my childhood. I don't really know. Do you guys know what year the original came out?
Oh, God.
Oh, it's 71, right?
That's the number in my head.
Okay. Right. And I don't know. I was probably 9 or 10 when I saw it for the first time, but it's fantastical. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like totally out and like so imaginative. And there's that flying scene, and like, it's just like, it's so evocative for a kid. So anyways, that association was just like, just totally bizarre and kind of like hard to almost make sense of that there would be that much effort to reimagine this music. But then listening to the album, it had that thing that I also had already come to associate with Primus. It was like incredibly artful, also totally circus, and also kind of like hard in the like timbres, a lot of, that distorted. His bass was doing what it was doing. It was just like, it felt totally within the bounds of like the aesthetic that those dudes had created. And also not too complicated, like from a musical standpoint. I feel like one of the things that I appreciate about like Les as a composer is like he does what he does super well, and he does that. It's like, it doesn't really like the arrangements, the structures of the music, even like harmonically, it's not a big stretch in terms of like needing to kind of, it wasn't going to be like technically that difficult to wrap my head around. So no, I wasn't like nervous. It was just more about, kind of being able to bring it and find my, also playing live as a cellist. One of the big considerations is the sound you get, because plugging into a pickup can be terrible. It just sounds like a harmonica. I mean, it's bad to get a cello to really sound like a cello loud and on stage is, it's a thing. You mentioned Brian Kehoe. That was, I worked to get a pedal rig together and to use some tube amps to sort of warm my thing up and get a little distortion and a booster pedal. So I was thinking a lot about those sort of technical aspects. It's like, well, how can I actually fit my cello into a live sound that's going to be able to do justice to the record?
Was that kind of a first for you too, to have to explore those setups and sounds?
Totally.
Yep.
Totally. And that was a huge thing. That was exciting because playing in, for example, again, an example like, Iron and Wine or some of the other groups, they bring a cellist because they want me to play like a kind of traditional cellist. It's softer. It's tonally much more soothing.
Make it sound like a cello.
Prince was like, right, make it scream, be able to do a duel with like Tim Alexander on like 5 kick drums. It's a cool task for me to undertake. And so that was a first. And I think we were pretty successful, more or less. It's like, it's still hard. I listened to some of the recordings and it's it sounds a little thin or something, but generally it was good.
Yeah, well, I would say, in general, the audience reception was great. I caught the original New Year's Eve performance, which you were not there to perform, but on the tour in which you were, I caught one date, and I was right on the rail, and it was really cool to be right on the rail for it, given that big elaborate stage setup. And I think what often happens, especially when traditional string instruments such as cellos and whatnot are being brought into the rock setting, they often get drowned in the mix or disappear. But you were in there. You had your fair share, which I'm sure was conscious on everybody's part, but it was refreshing to actually be able to hear what the cellist was doing, for example.
Yeah, man, that's cool to hear. I mean, I think the fact that like the Fungi Ensemble, so to speak, was just cello and vibes. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a pretty awesome like layup. You know what I mean? And just in that it wasn't a chamber orchestra. It wasn't like even wasn't violin or like saxophone or something. Although there were some shows with Skerrick that were pretty cool. And I bet in those I got drowned out more. It's hard to compete. But just to say like that instrumentation, I think is also, it's sort of like emblematic of Les's sensibility. Like, these are two instruments that aren't traditionally necessarily going to be soloists, but are some of the coolest. They're so capable of being solo instruments if allowed, and then have a certain depth that I think people really resonate with. I mean, I guess I'm like biased, but I think the cello is such an incredibly versatile instrument because it can like do all of that, just like full out, high, just even, upper register kinds of like screaming solos. And it can be a bass instrument that totally supports and gets right in there in the lower, laying down the carpet and stuff. It's cool.
Yeah. I kind of want to go back to that idea of walking into the room. You've got these tunes in your head verbatim. I'm sure you've been practicing them for a little while up to that point. We've talked to a lot of people who were invited into various Les Claypool projects, and it was, here, learn these 40 songs in 10 days, but you probably had a smaller list of songs to learn, but you go in there and it sounds like you're just playing them straight. Was there any jamming going on to kind of get to know each other, or was it just playing that Wonka material?
Honestly, leading up to it, it was pretty much, it was playing the Wonka material. And I think part of that was the gap between that New Year's show that you saw and when the tour kicked off, I think was kind of a long time.
It was.
So, yeah. So they were also just, and they probably practiced less than I had. And you know how it is when you make a record, you're piecing it together. You're not really thinking about how you're going to do it live. You can drop in and add parts and multi-track. So, in some ways I knew the record better than they knew the record at the first rehearsal, which was a relief for me because I got, I looked good because I was prepared and they're the band, you know what I mean? Yeah. So in some ways it was a relief, but those early rehearsals were really just learning that material. And then I guess it did branch out a bit to, include some other song, not so much jamming, but the fact that they opened the shows with their own music.
Right.
That was also, I believe, part of the rehearsal. I will say though, because we did different legs of the tour with breaks in between, and you see this actually with a lot of renowned and successful bands. They don't practice. They don't practice the first week of shows. It's good enough, and they basically use that time to learn their material, and then by the end of the tour, it's fucking incredible. Everyone is really lockstep and. But it was kind of that same thing. It was like, oh, you guys are just going to go in sort of blind, and it's going to be a little clumsy. And then, a week or two down the road, things are going to start to gel. And it's like that with, lighting. It's like that with everything. But yeah, so not too much jamming, but, definitely like drilling the material, just, we're going to learn this. I would imagine it is if you're going to put on a Broadway show or something,
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's rote memorization, but it's over and over and over again to get all those finer points. But you really, you actually uncovered something there or confirmed something I think that Frankie and myself have known for quite some time, and a lot of really diehard Primus fans have, which is if you're at the first show of the tour, it might be a little sloppy.
That's funny. And,
or it might be, the set list might be a little tighter, as in they're going to play the ones they know better, and then they open it up as they go. So it's, and it's not a knock against them. That's kind of how bands do it, which is fine. But we've known that for some time. So thanks for the confirmation on that.
Yeah, man. Of course. Yeah. It's like they've earned it. You know what I mean? We're talking, they pay their dues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Teddy, you are a completely professional musician, and you're familiar with all of these situations that you're describing, such as going on tour, rehearsing, getting familiar with a record. But a particular show for this tour was the Orpheum Theater one, the final show of the tour in 2015. And that was professionally recorded and it was streamed live. Mm-hmm. Did you feel particularly nervous or anything for that particular show?
Well, I wouldn't say particularly nervous, but now that the tour is done and we're looking back on it, that show certainly stands out in my memory, particularly because of all the guests. It was like Stanley Clarke was there, Danny Carey was there, Stuart Copeland was there, which I didn't necessarily anticipate. Those dudes, especially Stanley Clarke, to be honest, because he's someone who I was first turned on to Les Claypool when I was in high school. You got to figure, so I'm 34. Mm-hmm. It's in 94, mid 90s. I'm 8, 9, 10 years old. But then, and had older cousins on the West Coast, actually in Berkeley, older than I was, getting into harder, mainly more punk music. But one in particular was this bass player, one of my closest family members, and he had turned me on to Les, and I could absolutely appreciate it as a cellist who was kind of drawn to alternative styles of playing. But I will say in this period where a lot of my awareness about, slap bass, it was Les, but it was also Jaco Pastorius, and it was Victor Wooten. Stanley Clarke came into the picture and sort of just won out. And it was, and he has always sort of existed as this I knew pretty quickly he was this paradigm shifting fucking badass, you know? So when he showed up at the concert, I was pretty starstruck. I was pretty starstruck. And what was super cool about that, I'll always remember, was also kind of related to what we were talking about in terms of rehearsal. They had this little duel at the show that Lex initiated, you know, and it was cool. It was like, that's a thing he used to love to do. He would do it with all of us. And it's a compelling like device, you know, you get this back and forth and it's super relational and everyone's getting challenged. And anyway, so Stanley Clarke comes out and Les like invites him to the duel. And then Stanley Clarke kind of blows it away.
Oh yeah.
It was really, really exciting. And the part that I'll never forget though was like, it was either later that night or the next day. It was like basically the only time I saw Les like practicing in the back lounge of the bus. And it was obvious, you know, like that happened and that meant something because Stanley Clarke's his hero also, you know?
Yeah.
And the result is he's in the back of the bus, like literally playing scales. It was awesome.
Wow.
It's like an inspiring memory, you know, because we're all just like, doesn't matter who you are or how successful or what you've accomplished. We're all just like trying to, you know, just trying to do, you know, like be good. You know what I mean?
Well, and it's Stanley Clarke, man. All those guys you named, it all goes back to him and his work. Man, his first 3 solo albums, I jam them every once in a while and they just blow me out of they just blow me away. And then his work with Return to Forever, when they reunited in the aughts, I think, and we're touring around, his presence was the highlight for me. Cause I know Chick and I've seen Chick Corea a few times, but just watching Stanley, especially on the upright, man, you walk away from that going, that's the coolest thing I'm ever going to see, you know? So, I'm curious, about that too, a couple of things, because we've talked about that Stanley appearance before because it was so unusual, but you were there on stage. So a couple of things. Was it hard to concentrate for one? And two, you said like Stanley, and I don't know if Les said this afterwards, but in an interview at some point he said, Stanley kicked the shit out of me,
Oh, nice. I didn't know that he said that. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So how was that experience? Cause you're seeing him, you talked about being starstruck, but you're also, it was on Here Come the Bastards, I believe. So you've got a little part to play. So what was that like?
It was just thrilling. I mean, the fact is too, at that point, it's like, there's such a like celebratory sort of vibe. And even on a track like that, in terms of even my own parts, like I remember, I could just kind of rove along with the rhythm. So I could really, in some ways, be like a spectator.
Yeah.
Like the ego part of me was like, man, I wish I had a chance to like make myself known, like I want to play, I want to get in there, that's always something as a sideman, you're kind of finding that balance where you're like, you don't want to overstep and you want to contribute, what you're supposed to. And, but I think there was like a real yearning, to just sort of, just kind of like make it all work. But I think more than anything, I was just enjoying, like, I might as well have been like riding the rail on the front row. Just watch, I was just like, it's like, you're just sort of thinking like, damn, how lucky am I? And I mean, the Stanley Clarke thing was cool and I'll never forget it, but that's an experience that like I often, and I feel really lucky about this, like I get to have, especially because I often work with bands who I admire so much and I would be at their concert if I wasn't on stage. And so it's like this cool kind of surreal, sort of experience where it's like you're there, but it's a little bit of like, man, pinch me. How'd I get to be in this? Like, this is the best ticket in the house. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's really thrilling. Yeah.
Man. Speaking of those tunes, because you played the Wonka album, of course, and I do want to ask you about the parts where it was where you got to open up and do more than what's on the record. But those Primus tracks, and I believe you were playing mostly on Southbound Pachyderm and Here Come the Bastards. There probably is one more I'm missing, but I remember those two. Was it those two?
Yeah, pretty much. That kind of got locked in.
Yeah,
they would get stretched out, but that was sort of what happened.
So for your part, are you largely following or playing the bass line, or are you harmonizing? Because it's been a while since I've listened to any of these recordings. So, and like you said, it's been a few years already. What was your approach, and was it prescribed to you, or did you have freedom with those tunes?
I had freedom in the encores, which was great. And, especially like Pachyderm turned into a really fun kind of extended jam effectively. And it was neat because I don't know how it kind of manifested, but Les would often do these. This is like one of his, I think, sort of like, it's like, it's like a device, I guess, musically, where he would, he introduces something slowly and it gradually sort of starts to take shape. And then everyone knows, and it's great. It's great for big halls too, that it's just going to continue to build an energy, and it's like real energy music. So he would always, he would kind of introduce, he would always introduce the song slowly, like lots of reverb. That was sort of where I would insert myself, just kind of texturally, kind of adding to the cavernous thing. And then for some reason it would always it would break. He would do this stuff where he would kind of cue Mike to solo.
Yeah.
Then it would kind of go back down to like a simmer. Then he'd cue me. Depending on where it got, he would also then do what we were talking about, or he'd introduce sort of a back and forth sort of, showdown. And on Pachyderm, for whatever reason, it would turn into this kind of fiddle jam, which I just did once and thought it was super cool, and just kind of stuck with it, and would just kind of wait, and would just kind of, wait to sort of shred these 16th notes, it's just like, also not something I could do during the Wonka record, frankly. Like, that wasn't written into the album for me. And so it was just like all the pent up energy of just kind of, staying in bounds for a lot of the show would sort of get to come out then, which was always really fun. And he wouldn't always cue it. So when Pachyderm would start, I would just be so stoked, because I knew that, like, oh man, I'm going to get my yayas out now. This is going to be super fun, and that's when it was like, I remember one time he pit me against Tim, and like, that's hilarious. You know what I mean? I have a little cello bow, and Tim's like, and he's playing a 60-degree drum kit basically, but it totally worked. It was so cool, and it was back and forth. And then it just culminated with us playing together. And it was just like, basically, I don't know what I was just shredding bow hair, just noise cello, but really fun. Really, really, really fun. Yeah.
Teddy, you mentioned being the new kid on the block with a bunch of guys who have been together playing forever. And the thing about Les is that nobody eludes his nicknames. So I'm wondering if you got one during the tour.
Oh yeah, man. I was Tedward. So I'm Teddy. That's my name, but legally it's Edward. Teddy it's much less of a common, nickname. It's more common with Theodore, but Edward, my only go-to is Teddy Kennedy. He was also an Edward. And it's, it's like, half the time people don't believe me that my name is Edward. I can't get library cards and stuff, but Edward's my name on, like, plane itineraries. So I very quickly became Tedward, and it was on the, then that just made its way into the itinerary. It's pretty funny. Yeah.
Well, that's good, because that beats hazing. The nickname's fine.
Oh yeah, no, it was great. It was great. In all honesty, I really appreciated it. Just kind of like, there's like that kind of undercurrent of just like fun and humor and like,
Well, it seems if you get a nickname, you're in the club.
Yeah, totally. That's actually a good point. I think it probably took a few weeks to kind of crystallize.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So you were
he'll
in. You
out to me. I'll just get a text from him that's like Tedward, like exclamation mark. Just it. No, that's the exchange.
Just making sure you're still alive, huh?
Yeah, I think so. That's cool.
Geez, this is where I get to edit, because I forgot what my next question was. You said something that spurred something, and then it's gone. But I'll defer.
Oh, can I ask something meanwhile?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Teddy, what was it like for you? Besides learning the record and, as you mentioned, being very precise during the Wonka songs, what was it like for you to also be requested to wear a mask on stage? Because I'm assuming that's something that hadn't happened to you before playing with Les, right?
Yeah, it hadn't happened. It was interesting, man, because just like physically, it's a grueling show. I mean, they're hot stage lights and you're wearing a tuxedo. I remember I even got like a little a wardrobe budget, and I got this like vintage, authentic tux from like the 60s, the whole
Nice
puff thing. It was these like white shoes. It was super fun to kind of lean into the whole thing. And then, but it's hot. It's like a hot, black suit. And then you've got a rubber mask on your face. So by the end of the show, pouring sweat, but you just, whatever, you know what I mean? You just kind of go with it. It was tragic and then funny and then just whatever. But the fact is, so Sam Bass made the record, right? He had all the cello parts. And I'm playing all the shows, and then I get off stage, mask or no mask, everyone's shouting about what an amazing job Sam Bass just did. Like, Sam, you killed it. And I'm like, wait, I'm not Sam Bass. It was like, it was like this whole existentialist crisis. Like, I realize, because I'm wearing a mask, they don't know who's behind the mask.
Right.
But yeah, then I actually, I came to learn. I think it's so, I don't know. It's like, it's appropriate for like Les's sort of ethos, just the imagination of it, but also like the self-protection of it. Like he's a quiet dude. There's something very empowering and safe also about like being masked on stage. You can kind of do whatever you want. I mean, the fact that literally people thought I was somebody else. But like that just, I feel like allows you just in sort of a transcendentalist sense to sort of tap into something that has to transcend ego because it's not you. They literally don't know, theoretically they know who you are, but they don't. There's even a whole like history of mask work in like improvisational theater and absurdist art. And it's like, it was cool to kind of have that be present as like a, as like something to sort of, motivate the experience. Because when it starts, and we would start the show behind the screen and then the screen would lift.
Right.
In all honesty, knowing that it was just like, I was this otherworldly kind of ogre playing cello in a 60s, like whatever tuxedo, and I didn't have to be held responsible for what was about to happen. It's like, there's a real excitement to that. So I came around to it for sure.
Yeah. You talked about leaning into it. So I imagine first of all, thank you for not stealing Sam's identity and committing fraud or something. But that anonymity it does sound like it gives you some sense of freedom, but also you can lean into, I guess, the character of the cello player on stage, as opposed to I'm Teddy and I'm playing this. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
Exactly, man. Yeah, there's just like suddenly there's no pressure to be cool.
Yeah.
Like for people to like you because it's not you, I don't know how conscious that is in terms of like Les's prescription or like design in terms of how it's functioned spiritually or whatever, but it's definitely the experience that I had.
Yeah, and I think Les actually caught wind of that problem because I've seen a recording where he introduces everyone on stage and he tells the audience, and that's not Sam Bass over there. That's actually Teddy Rankin-Parker. And he said, Teddy, please take off your mask. And he said, so that's Teddy, the most handsome man on stage.
Oh, yeah. I was like, literally 20 years younger than everybody. That did happen. No, he would start to qualify it. Yeah, that was funny. Actually, one of those, I took my mask off and like threw it, and it went like, dangerously close to the edge of the stage. Oh, yeah. Because those masks are like, they're like handmade. He like has I don't even know the details. A lot of his stuff is made by, really, really capable builders, mask builders. I don't know. They've had them for decades. Yeah. It's like they're prize items.
Yeah. So if that's within arm's reach of an audience member, it's gone.
Game over. Yeah. That's funny.
Well, I'm glad you took care of that too, because that could have been a problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a whole thing. Once we would lose masks. That was like the wardrobe. It's like, it's not a Broadway show, so the infrastructure to take care of those props is like a little bit sloppy, but for a show like that was so necessary. I mean, that was a whole stage design, and then transporting it, seemed stressful. Like there was a whole crew that was doing a lot of work to keep that afloat.
Yeah. Given the parameters of that second set production, that's That had to be a lot of work for the road crew. And I'm curious about the first set. And I asked Mike Dillon the same thing. What are you doing during the first set of this tour? Are you taking in the Primus set here and there? Are you just hanging in the green room having a sandwich? What are you up to during the first set?
I'm literally, at first you're listening, you're taking in the set. You know what I mean? And as the tour goes on, though, for me, I'm in the green room listening to Mike Dillon play tabla music. Yeah, that literally every night, and it's a total joy. Him and I got super close, and he was a real, almost mentor to me. And some of my favorite moments were those first set kind of hangs, because they would be, the show would have started. We were not yet on. You get so kind of rote in your responsibilities. You know where you have to be when you have to be there. No one's checking in on you, but it would often just be like, you're in the hall. Most of those theaters, you can pipe in the front of house sound into the green room, so you can listen, so where the show is at. But yeah, I would just kind of waver between going out, depending on the hall also, because also some of these halls that we would play are incredibly beautiful. As a cellist, especially, they're like, they're built for like live music, sometimes like classical music. They're these super regal, kind of architecturally magnificent spaces that, I'm sure the like forefathers weren't envisioning, Primus fans, moshing in front of the stage. Right. But so like for me, even growing up around symphony centers and stuff, there was often a lot of really kind of cool allure to being in those spaces. So I would just take my badge and go up into the gallery up top and just kind of watch. And also the energy, like it's always fun being kind of a sideman where you're anonymous, mask or no mask, and you can kind of go out and feel who's around and come in to see the concert and their excitement. And, Primus concerts, there's a ton of energy, it's just like it's really intoxicating to kind of be around that. So sometimes I would just go out just to kind of feel the energy of the room. And, it's fun. It's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever sneak into the pit? I'm kidding. Yeah, I'm sure you didn't do that.
Protect the hands, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah, keep those hands ready. So did you get to hanging with Mike? Have you ever gotten to record together over the years now?
We haven't. We did during the tour. We did a couple of things like in various towns. I remember a great concert in St. Louis. He had a friend with a coffee shop, and we went and played. Just an improvised music set. Same thing in New Orleans, and we would make a lot of music together backstage, especially his tabla chops. I don't know if he talked much about that, but he's a real student, of Indian classical music, and he would be on Skype with his teacher, really studying ragas. And that's super interesting to me, just, from a music kind of theory standpoint. So I would sort of, I would try to eavesdrop on his lessons. And but I think I think we'll always be connected, and I'm sure we'll make music together. I've been seeing recently he's been broadcasting some Wiley stuff from his home space.
Yes.
Instagram and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know if you know about him. He releases like 17 albums a year, so he's I have this now I have this image in my head, and I'm going to propose this to you. I'm reminded of when Bela Fleck, and I think he still does this. He plays with Edgar Meyer, the bassist, and Zakir Hussain, the tablas player. So they formed a rocket trio, man. They are awesome. I got to catch them live one year, and that was another show where I just walked away going, well, I've been to the top of the mountain, and I don't know what, So, but if you on the cello and Mike on the tablas, if you can get Larry on the banjo, I think the three of you guys can really give them a run for their money.
I wonder if Larry's ever played the banjo.
Yeah. Oh, Larry plays a six string banjo, but the real deal, I would doubt it. But the things he could do with it, I just think you guys could really make some magic there.
Maybe epic.
I have one last question for Teddy. Teddy, just like every Primus album is different. Each tour is unique because of the sound they get. And I have discussed with Josh previously how the Wonka tour had a really, really perfect sound, really precise. I refer to you guys as surgeons on stage during that tour. So because you were at the rehearsals, I'm wondering if that's something that Les Claypool said since the beginning, that he wanted the tour to sound that way, or if it's something that just came about naturally.
I mean, that's something that came about naturally, really. You know, since I hadn't been on other tours, I don't have anything to compare it to. I also want to give due credit, but I'm blanking on who was running front of house for a handful of those sets. I know Tomas was on monitors because that's who I'm spending most of my time with. And that has a lot to say about how you perform as an ensemble is what you're hearing on stage, which is completely different from what people are hearing in the audience.
Right.
But I think also it's sort of the nature of like, you know, choreographing an ensemble that's cello and marimba and, you know, and Primus, to strike a balance where there's actually just the potential for interaction with those timbrally totally diverse instruments. You have to really be listening, you know, and I'm sure that came across. You know, it's totally different if you're all playing electric instruments and you can be loud, and to change your level in the hall is easy, but it's not at all easy when you're talking about acoustic instruments and mixing them with, you know, rock instruments. So that's cool to hear. I hadn't really heard that sort of explicitly sort of said about that sort of sound for that tour, but it makes sense to me. It totally makes sense to me, you know? Yeah.
I guess my one last question is, as an avant-garde artist, do you feel, and I'm kind of asking this flippantly, but at the same time, like, do you feel like that there's a label attached to avant-garde artists? Because I was, well, not at all surprised, but for the joke, I will say I was pleasantly surprised that you weren't a mad genius, you know, mumbling to yourself and among piles of trash as we're talking to each other.
That's awesome. That's really funny, man. It's weird to say that. I almost associate that more with like traditional jazz musicians. If you hang with some of these guys coming out of the conservatory, you know, it's like they're often more akin to like computer scientists or something. It's like there's like a significant math streak in a lot of new jazz music. But you know, I've always thought cellists in particular, my theory is that they're like, you know, they're like generally even keeled. And I think though, even egotistically speaking, it's because the role is like, you can't be an asshole, too much of an asshole, because you're not a soloist. You're not getting the attention that you think you might deserve because it's not written for the instrument. Yeah. You're literally written to be a supportive figure, man. You're like, you know, you're helping other people kind of do their thing. Yeah. You know, I think I've tried to embrace that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, actually, and I want to come back around because you would get the nod every once in a while for the dueling with Tim, or to just take off on your own to solo. And a lot of other people we've talked to who have played with Les on stage, they get the nod and they take off. And then maybe after 16 or 32, you're looking back at him, but he hasn't given you the nod to stop yet. So did you ever feel like you were just like, I'm running out of steam here, or this is enough, please bring it back? Or what was that experience like? Or did it work out for you every time?
No, man, that's funny. I hadn't even thought about that in a while. That dynamic, though, is super real. That's so true. That's absolutely right. There's the nod, and I don't think I'd framed it that way at the time, but you know, he's the conductor, you know, so everyone's really locked in, and not only is he the conductor, but he's also got a mic on stage that's, you know, going to all of our in-ears.
Yeah, the one in the horse head, right?
Exactly. So he can talk to us, you know, and sometimes he's saying inane shit and it's totally bonkers. And other times it's just sort of like setting up what's going to come musically, which is super helpful. But usually it's as much as a little look. I mean, and a really subtle look. So for the first several concerts, it was just understanding his body language, you know, how he would turn and sort of what that nod looked like, and also how he would end it. And if you missed either one of those, you were kind of fucked, and you'd get called out via the horse head. But the thing that was always cool, because I definitely got called out, you know, it'd be like, or he'd want something specific and he wouldn't know how to cue it. He'd want something where you were doing something more like rhythmic, and it would be this back and forth in a particular rhythm. And he'd sort of cue it, but you wouldn't get it. And then keep in mind, you're in the middle of a performance and you're playing music. It's really happening. And you want to like actually be able to inhabit, what it is that you're doing. So sometimes even if you're not doing what he wants, you still have to commit to what you're doing. And he may get pissed off and he may he may cut you off, and it might seem at the time like dramatic, but after the concert, like never any bad, nothing, it never lingered. You know what I mean? It was just like, yeah, we were doing that thing then. Half the time early on, I would bring stuff up specifically about those sorts of exchanges. Like, oh, you asked me to do this. Did you want me to do this? Whatever. And he would kind of have like forgotten, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was done. It was like, that was during the concert. Why are we talking about this?
Yeah.
Which was just such a relief, just because it's not about like, it's not happening on the personality level,
That's important. Leave it on the stage. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was fun. And I learned what he would ask. I learned, how to read him. And then, sort of just how to, because the other thing is if he gave you the nod to go in, if you didn't like capture the imagination of the room pretty quickly, then you just get taken out. So you had to like step up pretty fast. You had a set amount of time to like find a thing that was worth sort of existing.
Yeah.
And that was like my own personal challenge. It was like, all right, I know, you learn what he's into and whatever, that was really fun. And if you could hook him, then you'd get those extra 32 bars or whatever,
Yeah.
And it'd be like, oh, that was a good show. Like a lot of times for me, the good show would come down to like those couple of pockets of just being able to kind of step out. Yeah, it's really fun to think about this stuff because it's kind of been a while, and usually you don't articulate it. It's just like such a personal experience, it exists in you, only. So it's just really fun, man.
Well, it's great to hear on our level too, because now we have an idea. I think we had to a degree, but we have a much clearer idea of what's happening on stage with that nonverbal communication, or when he's going to go kiss the horse and whatever's going on there. So it helps us recognize and it doesn't necessarily spoil what's coming, but it gives us that idea of, wow, that was a short solo. Well, we might have an understanding as to why, So, and it doesn't ruin anything. I think it really helps us in the audience, especially a guy like Frankie, who's watching everything around him and has 360-degree hearing. He's cataloging it all. So, last thing I want to ask, because we're coming up on time here. Did you get a chance to help Les with his bowing technique at all?
Yes, I did, man.
Oh, cool.
I did. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think he respected, my classical training, and we definitely talked about it. I actually think he was sort of maybe thinking about getting in the market for a new bow. And I think at the time that I first connected with the group, the thing hadn't been rehaired in like, I don't know how many years, like literally. If you're not, kind of in that world, you don't even really think about rehairing a bow. But for me, it's like such a regular thing that has to happen. So we definitely bonded over that. Cause he bowed a bit in that Wonka, set. That was like a thing, and keep it and con legno is the phrasing, the Italian wording that you see all over classical music, where you just, or batista, where you are just hitting the strings, So honestly, yeah, he impressed me though, like he could hang with a bow.
Oh, neat. Yeah. Because we don't know that either, because it's just one of those things where this funk bass player picks up an upright and starts playing with it. But it's good to know that. Or if I was in that position, I'd think, well, let me know if I'm doing it right. I want to get better. So that's cool that you guys got to bond over that.
Yeah. Battuto, con legno battuto. That's the way it's usually marked in classical, repertoire, when you're supposed to hit with the stick. That's the kind of thing Les wouldn't know, but neither did I. So
yeah. Last thing, where can we find you on Instagram, Teddy? You're a pretty good follow, actually.
Oh man, it's my name, which is way too long, but it's just Teddy Rankin-Parker, one word.
Okay.
And I had a son about 15 months ago, so my Instagram has turned from cello to baby, but I'll enjoy it.
Well, I will say, when I gave you a follow, I was just scrolling through and I went, I don't know too many cello players, so I didn't want you to represent everybody, but I'm scrolling through. I'm like, oh, this guy's all right. And then I saw a post that was just simply titled, "My wife farted." And I thought, I can hang with this guy. He's cool.
That's funny. That sums up a lot of our life. So.
Phenomenal. Thanks so much, Teddy. I really appreciate the time you spent with us talking about your experience with Les and Primus and the Wonka tour. And I learned something today for sure.
That's great, man. Thank you guys so much for having me. This was super fun. Really.
Thank you so much, Teddy. It was fantastic speaking to you. And we encourage all our listeners to check out Teddy's Instagram and also his website. I love the design of your website, Teddy.
Oh, cool, man. Thank you. Yeah, that's Junbi Studio. Actually, there are a couple designers that I connected with in New York that do such cool work. I think you can see a link to their studio on my site, but I highly recommend them. They're awesome. That's
Nice.
Great. Thanks, man.